Welcome back to RBR guys, I'm Raz, your host, and this is my very own 2023 G87 M2 that I've owned now for over 12,000 miles in over 12 months. Regular viewers would have seen me collect it, then we did the first drive, as well as the M Performance parts upgrade. And today I want to bring to you my experience in those last 12 months, living with this car as my main family car for a family of 4. And these are the things that we're going to cover. First of all, how good of a performance daily it's been, particularly versus my experience with the new M3 Touring, my previous M2 CS, and how this now stacks up versus the M4. We'll then go over the M Performance parts and how that added to the ownership experience for me and how it affected the drive. We'll also go over things like living with the family, the system inside, and the surprising MPG figure that I now got out of this properly run-in car. And then finally, really important for any prospective buyers of this car, I'm going to give you a buyer's guide for our new M2, including this original version and the new lightly upgraded one, which actually has more power. We're going to go over all of that and then go for a drive. So join me guys, and let's see what life was like with my M2. Two things that always go hand in hand are cars and watches. And when you have a watch that matches the spec of your car, it's pretty cool. But you know what's even cooler? A watch made from parts of actual racing heritage. For example, one of the cars that Ayrton Senna himself raced in. Just imagine wearing a piece of one of Ayrton Senna's Formula One cars on your wrist. With our sponsor for today's episode, you can do just that. REC Watches is a young Danish watch manufacturer run by a mix of petrol heads and watch enthusiasts. And this is the 98 T4, a watch featuring original parts from legend Ayrton Senna's 1986 Lotus 98T chassis number 4. The car they used was actually driven by Senna for the last 8 races of the epic 1986 World Championship and is made to mimic Senna's car in every way. From the black and gold livery seen throughout the watch, Senna's large number 12 on the rear rotor, and even the backplate decoration, which looks exactly like the turbo Renault engine from that car. REC spent 2 years working with the classic Lotus team to create this limited piece. It uses the original aluminium plenum tubes reforged into the outer chapter rings for this watch. There are only 989 individually numbered watches due to the restriction on how much of the original's car material was actually available, and this piece is exclusively available at recwatches.com. As an RBR viewer, just use the code RBR and you'll get 15% off this watch. And do check out recwatches.com and you'll find pieces like this lovely racing green Tourer that matches my GT3 Touring perfectly. A huge thanks to REC Watches for sponsoring today's episode, and a huge thanks to you guys for always supporting our sponsors. Let's get back to the car. Now guys, let's start with one of the most important sections for you guys, which is the buyer's guide. Now you guys know all about the M2. It is essentially in this generation almost a shrunk down version of the M3 and the M4, although not that shrunk down. And it's basically using all the same components from those cars. For example, the inline 6 race engine, the S58. We've got M's adaptive suspension. You can still choose between your manual gearbox and the 8-speed torque converter gearbox. And of course, the M2 only comes in rear-wheel drive, differentiating it from those cars. But essentially, the same components. And in this first version that I bought, it makes 460 PS, 550 Newton meters, and a 0 to 60 claimed of 4.1 seconds. Now, when I bought this car, I bought the top level version that you could get, which was the ultimate package version, which comes with the carbon roof, the carbon buckets, and basically everything that you can get. Whether that was a good idea or not, we'll get onto in a minute. The car that you can buy today, however, is different. It's been mildly refreshed by BMWM. This car now has more horsepower at 480, and it's available in a few more shades like São Paulo Yellow. You get the option of getting the new silver wheels, and you even get that lovely new steering wheel. And in the UK, it starts at £65,000. And to get the top level version, you have to spend another 9.5 with the M Race package, and then that gets you the carbon buckets and the other bits and pieces. Now, how significant is that power bump going to be? We saw in the M4 LCI that it gave us a crazy launch control time, completely eclipsing the pre-LCI, so it could be quite significant. I'm not sure it's that relevant for the M2, however. You could buy a car just like mine in the used market currently for around about £50,000, which is a massive saving of maybe 20 to 25k off new list. And I really think that's the route to go, considering the way that the car market is at the moment. And you could go to someone like Charles and Dean, who I use for finance, and get a really good monthly quote as well with a good APR because they're independent. The manufacturer itself will probably give you a higher APR for a used car. But if you do want to get the new one, and I wouldn't blame you if you do, then BMW UK are doing 4.9% APR currently on the new one as of this video. So then that's another way to get into the car. And buyers, remember that an M2 CS is just around the corner. If you're looking for an even more M version of this car, that's the one really to wait for. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I'm expecting from that when we go for a drive. Personally, having lived with this car as it is, I wouldn't have got the ultimate package. I don't think the carbon buckets are really necessary, neither is the carbon roof or the carbon trim inside, and the M driver's pack just gives you delimited speed. Is any of that really important for M2? I don't think so. I would keep your money in your bank. And in fact, instead, if you want to spend a bit of money to make the car personal to you, go for the M Performance parts, just like I did. Which brings me on to the M Performance parts. I've really enjoyed living with these because they've added another layer of BMW M DNA to this car. This could have gone really badly if I chose the wrong options. I don't think I have. I think I chose the right ones that have helped individualize this car while maintaining a even more MDNA type look. So let's have a quick run through of what I added. The most obvious things, first of all, are, for example, the new wheels. These are in a staggered setup and are an inch bigger on each side, so 20/21 rather than 19/20 on the original set of wheels. And they come with the Yokohama Advan Sport tyres, and we will see how those have affected the ride later. Will this mess up the suspension of a car that I thought was actually really quite good to live with daily? I will talk about that shortly. So the first thing are the wheels, and I love these. You do get a choice of a couple of others. One is the center locking wheel, which is very expensive but looks really cool, though they are slightly smaller like the originals. And you also get the forged M Performance wheels as well. So those are other options you can have. I quite like these because they're larger and I think they fill in the wheel arch a little bit better. So that's the first thing. Then you get a number of choices on the front, and I've gone for pretty much all the things you can go for, which is first of all the carbon aero curtain on the side, along with the larger, lower carbon spoiler. And I think it kind of helps widen that front part of the car and give it a bit more of an aggressive stance. I've also replaced the front air intakes with the carbon motorsport inspired ones, which again, I think they look really quite good and help break up a lot of the body color that's on the front. Then these tie up quite nicely with our carbon side sills on the side. I didn't go for those silly Wolverine claw things because I think they just ruin the car's look, so we've binned that idea. And instead you just have this, which I think matches the previous M2's parts quite nicely and is quite harmonious actually in the way it looks in the end. Then you notice our wing at the back. Why on earth did I do this? Let me explain. Now most people go for the extended boot spoiler that goes on the tip there. I wanted to do this because it reminds me of the M homage concept. It reminds me of the Batmobile. It links in nicely with that whole Batmobile theme of the 50-year M badges, etc. And I actually think it suits the look of this brutish M2 more than the standard boot spoiler. I'd love to know what you guys think. For me, this has been the best thing I've added. I do think you need to add a few more parts to make it work. Or if you didn't, another idea I had was make it, or at least the top part, body color, and it'll look even more like those M homage style cars. So that's been an absolute winner from me. Whichever angle I look at it, it really just makes me smile, and I think it works so well for the M2. Then I added a bit of carbon again into the rear bumper in order to break up some of that body color again, which I think does help. And one thing I did not go for is those silly exhausts that you can get from M Performance. The good thing about those exhausts is they actually give a bit more of an interesting sound profile to this car, and that's something that I do think this car needs, and we're going to talk about that later on. So that's your M Performance parts. Now before we head for a drive, I want to relay to you a few things about living with this car. And the first of those things is how to actually get in the car, because there's a number of ways beyond just the key itself. For example, check this out. You get a BMW M card, which can actually lock and unlock your car just via this, which is actually really cool because you can fit it in your wallet. And what I find even more useful than that, which is having the digital key from your My BMW app, and you can actually unlock and even drive the car just using your phone. It's been super useful for me. The other thing that's been quite useful is having the My BMW widget on my Apple Watch, where again, if I need to, I can unlock the car, see what the current range, etc. is, and you can even see the car in its correct spec on there, which is really good. Then the boot space. Now you'd think coming from M3 Touring into M2 was Henderson for a family of 4. It's actually the one thing that we didn't miss all that much, because the boot inside the M2 is actually really quite big. It is a large boot for a small family. And that's one of the things that, like I said, we haven't missed. And I think it's actually really quite adequate for getting prams, bags, going on road trips. This is a nice big boot. And so it should be, because this is a car that has grown in this generation quite a bit. It's almost as big as the M4. So we are expecting it. And you do get good boot space. And you also get really good space in the rear. Now if you move our lovely carbon bucket seat to the side, the rear space of this car is actually brilliant. It feels as much as M4, if not even more sometimes, in a strange way. Maybe because it's in a small car and you don't expect it to have such a large interior. Here we go, guys, I'm in, and look how much headroom I've got. It's nice and spacious. I've got knee room. It's genuinely, it's a very good interior to sit in, and for long periods of time as well, as I'll explain when we go for a drive. But having my wife sit in the back, myself sit in the back on occasion, the 2 kids, it's actually been really good. But this is the element that was more Henderson versus the M3 Touring, where you'd have the extra door, more head space, easier to get in and out. It just felt more luxurious, a better format for a daily performance car, which seems like an obvious thing to say. But actually in all other areas, the M2 performed really well and really close to that M3. But despite all that, this has been really a very surprising, spacious rear for a car that you would expect not really to have that much space. I'd go as far as to say it's probably the most spacious 2+2 rear seating that I've had in a modern sports car. So it's good if you're worried that you won't have enough headroom or space. Now, the other side of living with this car that has been great has been living with the operating system 8 in its M version, which I absolutely love it. I've raved about it in almost every car I've driven because I've lived with it for the last 2 years, and I just find it so intuitive. I love the widgets that they've put here, all in M style, and these are unique to M cars. You get the live view where the car reflects everything that it's doing live, which is really cool. I actually really quite like that. And that's quite fun. You've got all your M drive setup elements. You've got your engine information, you've got your tire information with the M1 there. And this has all been great. And it's not just that, it's also the touch points are nice and large. The system is very, very intuitive in terms of finding the things you need to find, particularly in things like system, etc. It's all easy to use. Then you have the driver zone as well, which is configurable. So you can change the information that you get on there. You get the correct spec of your car as well. And something that I found actually really useful, of course, the car has Apple CarPlay. But one thing I didn't realize is if you are using Apple Maps, you can actually display Apple Maps in your driver zone in front, which is really useful. I don't know whether Apple haven't released the API to other map developers, but at least you can use it here for Apple Maps, which is really quite good. I also love how you can configure shortcuts in the system for the things that you use the most. Like mobile devices, you always need to change if you have multiple drivers. The interior lighting, which is actually great. I use the ambient lighting a lot at night, and it's really, really nice to change the atmosphere of the car. It looks great at night, and you even get those nice lights within the door cards for the M2, which are unique to this car. And another shortcut you really need to know about is how to get rid of the speed dong while you're driving. You have to do it every time, but it's very easy to do. You just hold the set button and that will disable the speed dong, because sometimes the cars don't actually know what the real speed is and it's really, really annoying. So just hold the set button and it'll get rid of it. Now, one other tip for you guys relating to exhaust sound. This button really doesn't do much. What you need to do if you want a proper exhaust sound is configure M1 to be your exhaust version. And what I do to do that is essentially keep everything else comfortable, but put the engine into sport and set that to M1, and that will open up the valves properly, because this car really needs it. If there's one thing it struggles with, it's good exhaust note. But then please make sure that when you set up M2, that everything's in the top setting, because this car's personality is hidden behind these modes, and we'll talk more about that later. Finally, the one thing I really don't like in this car is the steering wheel. I hate this old steering wheel. I think the new one is so much better. It's almost worth the price of entry into getting a new one. And I haven't liked this one at all. So just bear that in mind. Apart from that, I found this interior to be on par with M3, on par with M4. I think the buckets are a step too far, as I said, but they are beautiful, and it's nice that you can trim this car with carbon and Nappa leather, etc., to look, you know, close to those vehicles, which is great. Now, my friends, let's head out. Let's talk about what life has been like the last 12 months with my BMW M2. Now, guys, the thing you have to understand about the modern BMW M car, that they are such good daily cars and have such wide breadth of ability from comfort to sportiness, that in the first 100 yards of driving them, you won't even feel like you're driving a BMW M car. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that it is actually truly comfortable to drive. And that is even true of this M2, which historically has been the little brute of the family, immediately putting you on notice that this is a proper M car. Now, the standard setting that you start this car in is almost indistinguishable from something like a normal 240. And apart from the inherent pointiness of the steering and the tautness of the suspension, you'll feel like you're driving a car like that, because the true personality of modern M cars are hidden within these M1 and M2 buttons if configured correctly. And I don't mean that in a bad way, don't get me wrong. It's actually been quite beneficial because, say, when the wife is driving the car, I've had zero complaints that, oh, it's not that comfortable, it's too much of a sports car. It's actually been absolutely brilliant, and it just kind of does this stealth job of a normal BMW in the standard settings. But then as soon as you push any of those M buttons, and please do, the character of the car completely changes, and then you find that M DNA that you've been looking for. Now, the downside to this is, if you jump out of the previous M2 and into this car, you're going to be underwhelmed, because that car is always brutish, is always a sports car. Because this car, 90% of the time, posits you, it behaves like a normal BMW, and that's something that the old M2 couldn't really do. So with most of your interactions with this car, you're like, well, it's just not as brutish as that car is. But like I said, you need to put it into the more exciting mode. Then you will find that M DNA, you will find that M attitude, but it's just hidden away, and you only access it when you really need it. Now, the last time we did the launch control, it was rather disappointing. It was around about 4.3 seconds. That was on the original wheels, the original Pirelli tyres. Let's try it again now with our new wheel setup. For the record, I don't think that there's going to be any major difference in the launch control figure, but I'm still curious to see if we get anything different. Let's see what we get. A bit of a hesitation on launch. That's good. That's a hugely improved time of around about 4 seconds. Remember, last time I got 4.3. Now, is that down to new tyres, the new wheel setup? I don't know, but it's nice that we at least got close, much closer to the official figure. Now let's talk about power and speed, having lived with this. Now, this is only a 450 horsepower car, but I can tell you that it feels so much faster once you've dialed in to the correct settings in this car. Once you're in M2 and everything's dialed up, it is more than quick enough for the road. Very reminiscent of M3 and M4 in that regard. Even throughout the winter months, for example, never once was I thinking, damn, I wish this thing was X-Drive like my M3 Touring was, because it's just able to put down the power, and it was still usable in terms of performance and still felt safe. So these modern M cars, even rear-wheel drive, just a lot more, you know, they haven't got that twitchiness that the F-Series used to have. But what's been really fascinating to me is driving it back-to-back with my GT Porsches, which are also 6-cylinder, rear-wheel driven cars. Now, the great thing that I found was that despite driving those cars quite regularly, coming back into the M2 and driving it, both in terms of the handling dynamics, the engine response, etc., never really felt like a massive downgrade. Like when I dialed into the settings and put it into its true personality, it didn't feel too far away from the Porsches. And this is amazing to me, how far this little brute of an M2 has come over the years. But at least in daily usability, I feel it's genuinely getting closer and closer to something brilliant like a base 911 Carrera. Body control is excellent, the steering is precise, particularly in a rear-wheel drive M car. The steering is so much better in terms of feedback. And you're able to point it and place it on the road despite that heavier weight figure, just like you could with the previous M2. So I've been very pleased with the car in terms of performance. Now let's talk comfort, and again comparing it to previous M2. My last few M2s, like the standard original one and then the CS, I never got beyond 4 figures in terms of mileage over the same period. They were more like occasional toys. So I did maybe 4, 5, 6,000 miles, and that was it. This has done 12,000, over 12,000, matching or perhaps even exceeding my M3 Touring. And I've been using it every day as our main family car. The proof of the pudding here is in the eating. And it's because that standard setting has so much breadth of ability on the comfort side that I've been using it that much. And then that extends to things like the suspension, which is M's adaptive suspension, but it's so much better than it ever used to be back then, that just keeping it in the standard setting, it deals with even these awful UK roads in a really good way. When I did my first drive, I told you guys that I was starting to get close to 34 mpg, which was okay. But in these last few months, I've started now to get up to 38, almost 40 miles per gallon in this 450 odd horsepower sports car. Those are incredible figures, and you look at the overall MPG since it left the factory, it's around about 24.5, which to me is actually super impressive for a performance car of this ilk. But it was great to know that on longer journeys I could drive sensibly and get a really decent MPG figure. But then one thing I missed during those longer journeys from the M3 was the driving assistance and the self-driving steering assist, which sounds like a weird thing to say for the M2. But like I said, the M2 is actually such a good daily car that you end up missing those tech features that you found in M3 and M4 because they almost feel like they belong in this. The one part that's let me down, I feel, has been the sound, where this engine just never ever sounds as good as the original M2 did, nor does it ever give you the type of character you find in the V6s from VW Group, in Porsche and Audi. It's too, dare I say, flat, and it never quite hit any type of crescendo. It never, you could play with the gears all you want, overruns, etc. You don't get anything out of it. And if I was to ever get a G-Series 6-cylinder again, I would just have to do something with the exhaust, even if it meant getting that weird-looking M Performance exhaust. Comparing it to my M2 CS, I felt that was a car that would make me smile more. It was more pure, the soundtrack was better, and it was more of a brute all of the time. But this is just so much more usable, and I get more bang for the buck I'm spending every month because I can use it throughout the year. And then when you do dial in, it is properly quick and it is a proper M car. Versus M3 Touring though, that's a bit more of a complicated one because the Touring is so bloody good. In terms of performance, I suspect, especially in this LCI version of the M3 Touring that's coming up, it's going to be ballistically fast. It'll do a lot of what this car does in dynamics, but you get that much more tech, that much more space. And of course this is true of M4, where we've seen how fast the LCI is now as well. And that's been my struggle with this. I love the look, I love everything about it, but I feel I could achieve so much of the same with the more practical bigger brothers. And that's where I see big room for the CS to exist. The CS M2 needs to be a brute like the original CS was. Many of us reviewers say now that the CS models are the new true M cars of the BMW lineup, and it truly feels that way, that no mode is there in the car where it doesn't feel like a pure M car. And I'm hoping that from our M2 CS that's upcoming. As far as this car goes, I've really enjoyed living with it. It's been so much more practical, it's so much more grown up as a car that's not a one-dimensional sports car machine. It can do so much more and fills so many more roles now than it ever could before. I think it looks incredible on the road, particularly with the performance parts. And like I said, if you're going to buy one, get a base spec one and then do bits to it if you need to. The base spec is absolutely perfect. For my money, I think it's the best looking new M car that they've made in a long time. And as my mileage proves, I just love using it every single day. So guys, I hope this longer term ownership report was useful to you. If this was, please do like and subscribe to RBR. It's hugely appreciated. And I will see you guys next time.